advanced engineering, and I volunteer with Ben Bikes.
Would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Rachel Colton. I'm an ex officio member of Ben Park and Rec.
Mike Riley, Ben City Council.
He is now your borough chair for the next item.
Are you also our liaison?
I think Gina is actually your liaison.
Yes.
She may be online, but I'm not sure.
Sure. I'm Elizabeth Oshel with the City Attorney's Office.
She is legal staff support for Urban. So wonderful. It's a pleasure to meet you all. I apologize for kind of the delay of implementation from your interview to today, but with the changes of transition of staff, we kind of had to do other things. But thank you for your opportunity to serve. And today I'd like to start with just the high level basics of what urban renewal is, which is tax increment finance. So today, this is just a work session, so there's no official business being conducted. When Corey arrives, we will hold an official business, and that will be the election of the vice chair and the chair for the next item. So to begin, I would like to just say that what is tax increment financing? So simply put, tax increment financing, or TIF, which is what you're going to hear from now on, just TIF because it's easier to say, is just a financial mechanism that uses tomorrow's dollars for today's projects. Those projects need to eliminate blight and improve property values. Also, at any time, if you have questions, please don't hesitate to raise your hand. So we have to start off with kind of the bad history of what urban renewal is in the country. So first of all, urban renewal in the 1950s and 60s provided a substantial amount of money for cities. But in practice, those new initiatives kind of raised neighborhoods and displaced a lot of individuals. More than 1 million Americans over the first 2 decades. These projects did deliberately target communities of color, and particularly Black neighborhoods, wreaking havoc on their health and local environments for decades. You probably understand what redlining is. This is kind of the issue that displaced many individuals. Some Oregon examples include the residential sites near the Port of Portland, the Alameda District, and the I-5 corridor. So how is urban renewal implemented in the, there we go. How does this work in Oregon? So TIF is authorized under Oregon Revised Statute 457. It allows the local governing body of a municipality or a community, or a county that has determined the need to use TIF will adopt an ordinance or a resolution establishing an urban renewal agency, and in this case, a redevelopment agency. There are a total of 53 municipalities in the state of Oregon that use TIF. There's about 85 total TIF areas. That number has changed because Portland just adopted 6 new TIF districts this year. TIF is enacted in 49 out of 50 states, but it's implemented vastly different from places like Colorado and Oregon. And it was authorized through the Housing Act in Oregon it was authorized through the federal government of the Housing Act of 1949. So what is the Bend Urban Renewal Agency's role? It acts as the official redevelopment agency for the city of Bend. Borough is an investment corporation that carries out investment activities in established TIF areas to improve property values and enhance the livability and economic vitality of those areas. Is Borough the same as the city? No. While the board is comprised of the governing body, Borough is a separate corporate entity from the city of Bend. Per Oregon statute, any active borough shall be considered an active borough and not the city of Bend. So who does borough serve? Well, our first and primary fiduciary responsibility is to our stakeholders, which is the overlapping taxing districts. These districts forego revenue with an anticipation of greater returns upon planned termination that may not have otherwise occurred. Borough customers are those residents and citizens and businesses within a TIF area So while we are ensuring returns for our stakeholders, Borough will invest in projects that contribute to the overall welfare and livability of the TIF areas. So for example, ensuring access to more housing or employment opportunities while promoting neighborhood revitalization is the bread and butter of what urban renewal is. So what is the role of borough staff? Well, in 2018, the city of Bend entered into an intergovernmental agreement with borough. It provides staff for support for public meetings, budget preparation and oversight, financial management, reporting, all the things and components that you have to use to implement an urban renewal agency. You do have an urban renewal project manager under the direction of the city manager or his designee, which is my boss, Matt Stewart, the real estate director. We manage, us three, and along with other city staff that's been supported and provided the day-to-day operations of the urban renewal agency. So the big question is, what is blight? And in the state of Oregon, it's a very broad definition, but it is areas and parcels that by reason of determination and deterioration, faulty planning, inadequate and improper facilities, and unsafe structures, or any combination of these factors that are detrimental to the safety, health, and welfare of the community. So there are 14 key criteria that an urban renewal area has to meet. So one of the 14, the primary use is inadequate streets or utilities, stagnant and unproductive land, poor planning, lack of roads, irregular shapes, and yes, impaired investments. So what are some of the visual examples of blight? So you have unsafe structures. In the middle, you have undeveloped land, and this is a photo from the Juniper Ridge urban renewal area. And then you have infrastructure needs, which are incomplete streets. This is the halfway road adjacent to US 97. So what is the area to be improved? It is in a defined area, i.e. the core area that has been identified with blight, where projects funded by TIF would mitigate those conditions. And we'll get into the core area and what those blight conditions were in the end. Are there limitations on the establishment of urban renewal districts in the state of Oregon? Yes. Communities with populations less than 50,000 can incorporate up to 25% of their total acreage or assessed value into a TIF area. For communities with greater than 50,000 population, we are limited to 15% of total acres and 15% of assessed value. So where does Bend stand up? Currently, as you see, the city of Bend has about 21,000 acres, and then you'll see the 3 urban renewal districts below it, and then also the total assessed values below it. Moving forward, if we ever increase a district, establish a new district, you take the increment assessed value plus the frozen base, which gives you the total assessed value. But as you can see, we are far below the statutory requirements. About 7.67% of our TIF areas are well below the 15% max, and then also the 5.1% total assessed value. So what are some of the eligible projects? Well, in the city of Bend, we have water, sewer infrastructure, transportation, land purchases, parks and open space, developer incentives, and public facilities. I put an asterisk on public facilities because if we incorporate that into a public plan, it requires a vote of 3 of the 4 top taxing districts in the state of Oregon, in the Deschutes County. So if we added in anything that is a public use, it would require conformance and confirm with the 3 top taxing districts.
Which are which districts?
It would be the school district, the city, and the county. A general rule of thumb for most projects, though, is it has to have a life of about 10 years. The purpose of urban renewal is to remedy blight. It's not to kind of put Band-Aids or cosmetics on an area. We are allowed to fund and increase usage of tourism-related projects, but according to state statute, tourism-related projects also have to be a lifespan of 10 years. So that's kind of how we base that on. So the mechanism of TIF is kind of complicated. So after an area is established, Borough will determine what the frozen base is and what the projected amount of revenue is over a period of time. Statutorily, there are no legal requirements for a plan length, but the average is about 30 years. Various amounts of increment will be determined to adequately fund the identified projects, and then that final amount adopted will become the maximum amount of indebtedness that Borough can use. So it's basically what you can bond against over 30 years and be able to repay it by the year 30. So we use inflationary rates. We backtrack of what we can pay based on inflation, interest rates, and stuff like that. So for example, in the core area, the maximum amount of indebtedness was $260 million. Excuse me, TIF revenue was $260 million. The maximum amount of indebtedness is $195 million. So that 195 plus interest gives us the 260. So as I noted earlier, a frozen base, that's how we kind of cap the increment. It's the amount of assessed property valuation in a TIF area that is assessed at the same rate for the duration of the plan. So if it's $1 and every year you get that 3% annual growth on your property tax bill, or you substantially improve it, that $1 still goes to the taxing districts. That 3% and new value will go to the urban renewal agency to do projects within the area. And you cannot use urban renewal dollars outside the established TIF area. So you can't use core area dollars in downtown. You can't use Juniper Ridge dollars in the core area. It has to be within the district. And as I was saying, that yeah, the increment is that 3% associated with ballot measure 50 or new developments. So visually, how does this look? Over 30 years, you'll see at the very bottom that frozen base goes to the taxing districts. That light green is the increment that goes to the urban renewal agency for projects. And then at the very end of that plan life, you'll see that that increment and that frozen base gets redistributed back to the taxing districts. If you compare what the frozen base is and what the division of taxes are going to be at the end of the plan document, you see a substantial amount of difference between no development or low development and then development with the TIF for taxing districts. Now, this is the question we get a lot because it's on your tax bill. Is this a new tax on residents? It is not. The tax rate remains the tax rate remains the same. Instead of residents paying for a tax increment, that division of taxes are applied to the overlapping taxing districts. So visually, what does that look like? So we identify an area and you're like, okay, this is what we want to invest our TIF dollars in. We think that this is going to provide us with $25. In most states, this is how TIF would look, right? But in the state of Oregon, because of the way the division of taxes work, it gets equally distributed to all residents within the city of Bend. So normally it would be $25 in an area. That area pays for its TIF, but it's divided amongst all property tax owners and statements in the city of Bend. So yeah, it does show up on your tax statement. Due to ballot measure 50 and ORS 457, all tax rate payers in the city of Bend will see it on their tax statement. But if you compare your annual tax statements, you notice that the tax rate does not go up if an established plan document is approved. It just divides what the taxing districts would normally have got and just reallocated it back to the urban renewal districts. Questions on that one?
Good way of showing voters how their dollars are.
Yes. So does this impact special bonds and levies or special assessments? No. Due to ballot measure 50 and also some various revisions of ORS 457. Prior to ballot measure 50, yes, this would affect, it would have been a new tax on residents in the city of Bend. But due to ballot measure 50 and then also 2019 update to ORS 457, special bonds and levies are not affected. So a city transportation bond, school bond, parks and rec bond, they still receive that frozen increment assessed value, but they also receive the increment of new development as well. So In the core area, the tax rate right now is 16.74. Borough gets 13.209. The rest of that goes to the special assessments. Does this affect the school district in any way? No. A division of revenues from a local school district is offset by the school funding formula established by the state.
Because I thought, I understood from Sharon, I might have misunderstood. I thought the decrease in revenue was basically spread across all the districts and they all saw a decrease, but it was much smaller because of that. Are you saying they're made 100% whole by the state? They don't lose any revenue when there's a TIF?
Only the school district.
The school districts do have a decrease in revenue. It's spread across throughout the state, or? So you said there's no impact. I thought there was an impact. It was just much smaller than it would be if it was a direct impact, if that makes sense.
So due to the state school funding per pupil formula, if there's revenue that is pulled out from the permanent levy and it goes below the statutory formula for per student, the state will come in and fill that gap if there's a decrease. So it does not affect the revenue, but it indirectly affects their current revenue, but they're not affected. They're made whole.
So they see no loss in revenue, no schools throughout the state see a loss in revenue because of taxing.
No, because they get that, they should get that back from the state school
Okay, that's
formula.
right, I didn't understand. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, let me look into that a little bit more, but
I might have misunderstood Sharon before I was talking.
for the last 10 years of being in Oregon, we've always said that school districts maintain an indirect impact, but
Mhm.
not an impact.
Okay.
Yeah. So how do we implement a TIF area? So you'll have a TIF plan and you'll have a TIF report. The plan identifies the maximum indebtedness, the projects, and the area that you want to implement this in. It'll be a map, a legal description, related land uses, relocation plans, maximum indebtedness. On the other side, you have to have a report, and that's the conditions of the area, reasons, blight identification, and then estimated cost and impact to taxing districts. So what is the approval process for a TIF area? First, it will be recommended by borough by resolution to city council for consideration. It will go through a 45-day consult and confer period. And within that time, you got to go to the planning commission to determine conformance with the comp plan. We consult and confer with all taxing districts that are affected. Hey, so how does that look? We will first class mail to Ben Parks and Rec the TIF plan and TIF report, and we provide them an opportunity to comment on the plan, which they can provide amendments, changes, deletions. We will notify the public that an urban renewal district is being established. And what we usually do in the city of Bend is we'll, through your utility statements online, you'll get like that visualization of this is a plan, open house, public hearing. And then we'll go to the county to present because the assessor handles the assessment of an urban renewal area. And then the first meeting of the city council, we will bring any changes to a plan document that taxing districts have offered. The council will say approve, amend, or ignore. And then they'll do a public hearing, determine if this is legal. Did it meet the criteria of establishing a plan document? And does it meet the ORS 457 statute? And then the second meeting, it'll be adopted by ordinance. Within the first day after the adoption of ordinance, someone has 90 days to challenge the validity of an urban renewal district to LUBA, the Land Use Board of Appeals, because surprisingly, it's a land use decision. We just had to put that caveat out there. After 90 days, the ordinance and the plan cannot be challenged. So generally, this process that's on the screen takes about 3 months. This does not include any of the preliminary work or feasibility studies that are associated with establishing an urban renewal district. For example, the core area took 3 years prior to the establishment of the core area due to the core area project of the plan. So how do we use debt? So fun fact, we can't just spend money. We have to actually take out debt in order to spend money. So every dollar that we want to spend, we have to loan against that dollar. So the way that that works is we'll do a general fund debt from the city of Bend. So for example, my salary, legal HR operations, the smaller projects that are not capital, we will get what's called a floater loan until the debt is issued. So that looks like if I rack up $500,000 in operations for Borough, the city will issue me the debt for $500,000 on June 30th. On July 1st, I pay that $500,000 from the TIF back to the general fund. For the bigger projects, we are required to take out a revenue bond, and this is not a general obligation bond. GOs require a vote of the public. Revenue bonds are just revenue because we have the revenue coming in. These are large projects, so we're taking out our first bond for the core area this year for $6 million for 2nd Street and Franklin Undercrossing. And that bond will be solely for those two projects. We can't kind of dip and choose what we want to use it from. Now we can take out a revenue bond for $5 million and hold on to it and figure out what we want to do, but we'd be paying interest every year without actually gaining something out of it. Visually, so the city has a standard debt coverage ratio of 1.5 for what we use. We adopt that through Borough as well. We want to maintain between 1.45 and 1.45 and 1.5. Visually, you'll see how that looks. The green is the increment. The purple is our standard operations. That would be our general fund debt. And then the red would be our revenue bonds. And we can issue debt as many times as possible. We just have to pay it off by the date of plan termination. We can't have outstanding debt by 2050. So we could take out a loan 2045, but it'd have to be a 4-year loan with general favorable rates with us be able to pay it back in time. Can plans be changed in the future? And the answer is yes. There are 2 paths where we can change a plan, a minor amendment and a substantial amendment. The minor amendment are the simple changes to a plan. You can change project cost. You can modify the boundary by less than 1%. You can change project goals. You can change projects altogether. You can just pick and choose what you want. A substantial amendment, there are only 2 key qualifications that we have to meet. Any modification to an area plan that's greater than 1%, and any increase to debt allowance up to 20% of the original maximum indebtedness. When you do a substantial amendment, you go through the entire process again with the approval process, borough recommendation, consultant confer, planning commission, and back to city council. You do get 1 inflationary adjustment to your maximum indebtedness per life plan without any of the hoopla that's associated with it, but we have to do a financial feasibility, a financial report. We have to send that report to the taxing districts, so forth and so on. So how does urban renewal look in the city of Bend? So currently we have 3 urban renewal districts. As I pointed out earlier, we are at 5% of the total, 7% of the total acreage out of the 15, and 5% out of the 15% of our total assessed value. We have Murphy's Crossing. It was established in 2008. That plan ends in 2038. The maximum indebtedness was $52 million. Primary goals in that plan were transportation, parks, open space, affordable housing, and business development. The 2 major projects that Murphy's Crossing has funded since 2008 have been the US 97 access to the southbound and then the Stillwater Crossing affordable housing complex. We provided revenue for the infrastructure to the site. Juniper Ridge was established in 2005. That plan ends in 2035. The total maximum indebtedness is $41 million. And the reason it is so low is, Juniper Ridge is greenfield. So the amount of development potential at the time is very low. Plan goals is transportation, parks, open space, infrastructure, and business development. The major projects that have been contributed since 2005 was the US 97 northbound contribution to Oregon Department of Transportation, Cooley and Tallis Road improvements and construction. And then we awarded $100,000 in site assistance last year to two relocating businesses from the core area. And then your purview is the core area tax increment finance plan. It was established in 2020. The plan ends in 2050. It is the largest maximum indebtedness of the three that we have at $195 million. The plan goals are transportation, streetscapes, and utilities, parks and open space, affordable housing, and business development. And so far, since 2020, our first two major projects have been the 2nd Street streetscape and Franklin Avenue undercrossing. CAB did award $100,000 in small business assistance last year to 7 businesses within the core area, one of them being Kalima Market and Timber Kitties. So one of the main requirements of establishing an urban renewal district based on DLCD's 12 goals is community engagement. And the way that looks is as long as you provide community engagement or public participation at every stage of plan formation, it meets the requirements of ORS 457. The only legal requirement that we have based on statute for public involvement is the Planning Commission hearing and the City Council public hearing, but the City of Bend has adopted a broader approach to public engagement, so we incorporate it at every stage. Just so you know, when I was not here, but the core area hosted 3,000 community members to implement the core area, 8 Urban Renewal Advisory Board meetings. It had 6 pop-up outreach events, 1,500 direct mailers, 4 taxing district board meetings, and then 2 in-person and online open houses. The breakdown of how we've identified in the report, the breakdown of the cost is about 40 to 50%, which equates to about 95 million will go to transportation, streetscape, utility, and infrastructure improvements. Between 15 and 25%, or around 35 million, will go to affordable housing development or developer incentives. Business development or developer incentives will equate to about 15 to 20%. Open space, which is parks, trails, general beautification efforts, 10%, which is about 20 million. And then we are legally required to administer the plan, which is providing public audits every year, staff support, paying the bills. You know, we rent from the City of Bend, our space. Well, we don't rent, they just charge us for it. But that's an administrative fee of about 5%, which equates to 10 million. And so the project cost is over the 30-year life plan. So every 5 years, you might see one project getting the most money, but over the course of the plan, you'll see that it should kind of equate to what's been kind of suggested. So what is the role of the Core Area Advisory Board? You have 2 functions currently. You advise borough and the city council, but you wouldn't know that they're the same individuals. But on the CAB side, it's the implementation of the TIF plan. You provide oversight in how we want to allocate those TIF funds. How do we want to maximize the budget in terms of TIF implementation? What are some of the programs and projects you want to use TIF for? And then any potential amendments, both minor and substantial, to the TIF plan. For council, you just want to advise them on how any action municipally can the city take, like the development code update, which there was a subcommittee. We forwarded those recommendations on to the community development. We'll provide a report back to you on what they think. And then any actions that help business and housing developments within the core area. So currently, our current projects, I spoke with about the core area business assistance. We have one streetscape project, that's 2nd Street. The total project cost is about 4.3 million, but the total project cost with financing included is about 7 million. The difference between those two numbers is 4.3 is today's dollars. The 7 million goes to the actual 195 million maximum indebtedness because we have to finance it over, we're taking out a 20-year bond for that one. And then transportation, which is the Franklin Avenue undercrossing, we're contributing 1.6 million to the project. That is not a borough project, that's a city project, but we're helping fund that because it enters into the core area. And that total financed will be 2.7 million. And just kind of give you an update on the Tiny TIF / site specific. So we launched those programs on January 1st. Borough will get a preliminary look at the first batch on February 19th of those applications. That meeting will be just, do you like the idea of what staff is recommending with these projects? Once we have a general idea if they want to move forward with those applications, this group will get to purview some of those if they are in the core area. But the goal is to incentivize livability through TIF. So we're focusing on both making housing more affordable and also trying to encourage good paying jobs.
I just ask a quick question.
Yes, ma'am.
Of the applications that we've gotten, only some are in the core area, correct?
One,
One.
yes.
And so, I'm sorry if I'm forgetting and you've told us this
It's okay.
before. But, so the ones outside of our TIF district, do they have to go through a similar process to establish these individual little TIFs?
So through the process that laid out, yes, ma'am.
So it'll be quite lengthy for like 7 years? Or-
Well, we're doing a feasibility study on them right now. I'm meeting with legal tomorrow to preview the first one, answer any questions. And then if council says go forth, because, okay, so the way that a typical urban renewal area is established, borough or a developer or a citizen will say, I think this area is blighted. And they will ask borough to consider, is this blight? Is it reasonable to establish a TIF area? In that interim, we work with the developer. And in this case, we'll work with the developer, but in a typical urban renewal district, we will meet with property owners of an area. We'll do an assessment of the majority of parcels in that area. Do they meet one of the 14 key criteria of blight? If a majority of those parcels have one or more of those 14, we can say that that area is blighted. Once a feasibility has been conducted, we've determined blight, we will bring it to borough, like what we're doing on February 19th, and say, we think that this area is blighted. We think that this project will help meet city comprehensive plan goals, which is to provide more affordable housing and housing in general. And will that project reasonably eliminate blight in 30 years or 20 years or 15 or whatever the plan document is? If we determine that and city council, borough says on February 19th, yes, we agree with all these findings, then that kicks off the 3-month process. And then starting at that 3-month process, that's when the public gets involved. We'll online open house, planning commission, public meetings, consult and confer. We're estimating that from February 19th to the finish line will be about 4 months, 4 or 5 months. We're from borough recommendation officially by resolution to approval will be about 3 months, but there's probably going to be about 2 months in between January 1st and March 19th. No,
No, it's not.
because the TIF area, so this is where the term blight gets confusing, right? So if we establish a TIF area and we say it's blighted, the natural reaction is my property is not blighted. But blight, like I said, is 14 criteria. One of them, yes, is unsafe or stagnant and unproductive land, but another one could be just irregular shaped parcels. Could be lack of roads. We need to upgrade our sewer systems to incorporate 300 units, those type of things. And normally when you have a 300 unit or a development of any size, it's going to affect the utilities in the adjacent area. So what we'll end up doing is determine the impact of that and all that stuff.
So the benefit to a developer is that the costs for all this infrastructure improvements are sort of helped by the properties within this town, as
Yeah.
opposed to improving things that are gonna help all these other people, but they're paying for everything.
Right.
So that's the whole point, is leveling the playing field to a degree.
So borough gave staff recommendation last June that they didn't want to take property money from over here to incentivize development over here. The Tiny TIF program is the development pays its way. It's not, the old adage taken from Peter to pay to Paul. It's you pay your way, but in like the core area, so Second Street, right? All those adjacent businesses on Second Street and Franklin and Greenwood are going to benefit directly, but the adjacent areas will benefit, but then the broader area will benefit because if you increase foot traffic in one area, you increase foot traffic in the entire area. And that's one of the metrics that we use to justify the impact of cab, borough in the core area. I think Allie's left me all that stuff that we'll get into in June, but has pedestrian traffic increased? Has bus ridership increased? Has multimodal, non-motorized pedestrian usage increased and stuff like that?
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
I think you probably covered that once before, but some people are new.
Yeah, if you have questions.
Helpful to
Yeah.
kind of understand.
So what was the need that borough and city council were trying to solve? We did a policy justification last year. 8 out of 10 jobs in the metro area cannot afford multifamily rent in the city of Bend. That equates to about 50% of households. And in addition, based on PSU and census figures, we'll need an additional 1,000 multifamily units by 2030. And that's including what is currently being constructed right now. Visually, what does that look like per household? And so one of the things that we heard when borough and council directed staff to kind of identify a replacement for the multi-unit tax property exemption was how do we increase through the use of data more impact to create more affordability? So staff, i.e. me, really took the opportunity to use market rate data, a lot of other data sources, including PSU numbers. So for example, a person or a single person household, the average is around $43,000 for your annual salary. But the color graphic bar is the number of households within that area. So if you look, 90% of the households, or excuse me, the 90% area median income of a one-person household is $66,000. The average rent you need to make in order not, the average salary that you need to make in order not to be cost burden, which is 30% of your income, is $72,000. So you'll start to see that 90% you're getting cost burden in the area, not 100%, but 90%. And that is visually represented at every stage. So the one person, two person households, you see 90% household at 75,000. So that's two people making 75. They start becoming more cost burden. The main one that we noticed that was a key takeaway in addition to the one person's household was the two person household with a child, or what is it called? Dependent. I don't have one. So you see the average is a little bit above 85,000. That's the average two person with a dependent income in the city of Bend. But the rent starts getting more cost burden at that rate too. So we focused on 90% AMI. That's why we adopted these policies to begin at 90% AMI and below. The City of Bend's housing department has additional programs for 80, 70, and 60%. So we wanted to start kind of like with a market rate middle income housing program and kind of work backwards from that. Originally, we provided just one kind of broad policy, but through discussions with the Council Stewardship Committee, borough, city council, our developers, we've broken it up into 2 housing policies and 1 employment policy. The first base policy is you get 12 years total tax reimbursement if you rent 15% of your new units at 90% area median income, and you have the lower than the statutory amount of rent increases for the duration of program assistance. If they go above and beyond that, they still have to meet the base policy, but they have to provide more than 15% of units and or more units rented at 90% AMI or below, additional units for lower rent increases. And then through conversations with borough, we added energy efficiency standards and also supplier diversity and local contract sources. I can officially say that we have two of our first five that are doing energy efficiency and affordability, and one with contractor diversity in addition to affordability. So, but they still have to meet that base affordability policy, but they can also qualify for additional assistance if they do some sort of LEED certification, zero-scaping, energy efficiency, and then the supplier diversity, we took the same definition that HUD uses, which is 23% of local contractors for a project construction cost, with a focus on 5% of that being minority-owned or woman-owned businesses. I thought we was going to have way more questions along the way, but if there are questions, discussions regarding anything that was presented, we don't meet again until 4:30. So
You want to provide these PowerPoints to us?
yes. This PowerPoint discussion recording will also be on your CAB webpage too, but I'll also send a link out to the PDF version of the PowerPoint as well. Yes.
I have a question on what the funds can be used for. And you mentioned that we couldn't use them for like Band-Aid type solutions.
Mhm.
What comes to my mind is things like placemaking. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
So it has to be a part of a broader capital improvement project. So for example, 2nd Street, it's placemaking, right? It's adding curb cuts, sidewalks, trees, stuff like that. But it's a broader project of updating and replacing the sewer line. So that's where we just can't fund like an art mural project if it's not directly correlated to the remedying of blight of an area. So for example, the facade improvement program, the core area established, as long as that's part of a broader, so Kalima Market, for example, they'll be doing a facade improvement, but they're replacing their doors or updating their entryways, replacing lights, those type of things. So just painting itself wouldn't be allowed, but if you incorporate it with a broader project, then yes.
It's about making sure that the investments are part of an infrastructure improvement project. So it does get a little bit of a fine line when you kind of get to those granular details, but you can't use TIF for maintenance or operational expenses. They have to be capitalizable improvements.
Yeah, I've got just some sort of bigger, maybe existential questions about, so I'm assuming there isn't a similar group that meets as a Juniper Ridge Advisory Board or a Murphy Crossing Advisory Board. If they are, I've never heard of them or
No.
liked.
So I'm glad you brought that up. So one of the requests that we are going to make to you in the new year is, would this group be willing to take on a broader urban renewal advisory role? So what that would look like is you would provide advice. We have to get direction from Bura because they will meet on February 19th to kind of talk about general ideas. And I meet with our chair and vice chair next week to kind of listen to what they're looking for the next biennium. So we would like to see a broader urban renewal advisory committee with focusing on the 3 urban renewal districts and all site-specific programs, whether that be housing and employment.
So we get a cool new acronym.
Yeah.
Nice.
This is John. My question is, what would our membership look like if we were to do that as far as having representation of those 2 other districts on our board?
So we'd have to figure that out.
Okay.
That's a broader conversation, but we would say for sure that this group would remain at the appointed term that you've been applied to, just to honor that commitment that you've kind of carved out for what you're looking to do. But I can't answer the specifics just yet of what the role membership could be of a potential board, but it's a hypothetical currently. But there is a conversation internally and with some of our CAB members about, does that board even want to do this? If you say no, we would still be looking at another advisory board for the site specific and other urban renewal areas. So you don't have to decide that today.
It's not going to change anything they have. So there's a lot of process to go to think about what is the right mechanism to get advisory boards looking on those other urban renewal areas as well.
Yeah, lots more questions.
Follow-up question, I guess.
Okay.
So, I mean, I've been in Bend long enough. I remember when borough was separate from city council, and I remember that didn't necessarily go very well, and, so aid borough, has there been any discussion about potentially separating out borough? I know there was tension. I think that can be a healthy tension. I don't think the goals of city council are necessarily always directly aligned, or I guess the opposite with borough.
Right.
And when it's the same people,
Mhm.
yeah, I don't know that you really get that different perspective.
Right. So in the state of
Different
Oregon,
agencies have.
yeah, this, in the state of Oregon, the primary agency makeup is the governing body, right? So that's kind of the standard in the state of Oregon. So in most localities, the city council is the urban renewal agency. Have there been discussions? No. That would take a direction from the city council, acting as city council through the advice of legal and city manager, but nope.
Folks have other questions?
I have questions about the core area.
Yeah.
If this is time.
This is the time, yeah.
Just,
Before, I have to leave a little early, so I'll leave and then call in on Zoom, just to, so if you see me bounce, sorry.
So Oregon statute says we can't increase property taxes by more than 3% per year. Are the properties within the core area maxing out that 3%?
That's a really good question. So the way that a county assessor assesses increment in the core area, there are three primary buckets. And you'll get this in the investment strategy once Burra says, yeah, go forth, and we'll go through that investment strategy and get your input and feedback on that. So there are three types of assessments, and I didn't cover this in this because it gets really complicated. There is the standard growth, which is the 3%. Some properties will get a broader increase, like 8%, like happened this year in the city of Bend, but that was because of a new passage of a tax rate levy by the conservation district, I think. So that's how that kind of gets convoluted. So if there was no change in the area, your property assessed valuation would go up 3% annually. That 3% difference every year will go to the urban renewal agency if you're in the core area from a established frozen base. The second is new and substantial improvements. So if you take, what's a good project Costco. So Costco located in Juniper Ridge, it was Greenfield, right? The taxing district still maintain that frozen base on the Greenfield, but all new increment from that Costco is going to go to the Juniper Ridge Urban Renewal Fund. That's a lot of money, right? Because it's brand new development, it's commercial use, it's assessed by the assessor. The third way is utility assessments, but that's not handled by the assessor, that's handled by the Department of Revenue at the state of Oregon. And utility assessments could be anything from power lines, right-of-ways, train tracks, water, sewer, private, the private utilities. Are we maxing out that 3% in the core area? Yes. Yeah. For the fund.
So I guess my follow-up question to that is, if we improved the core area such that it was a happy-go-lucky place,
Right.
is there any difference in the revenue coming in? Do we expect any difference?
So the only major development that's occurring in the core area that would substantially improve is the Jack Straw project. But council and Burra decided to use MUPTI within the urban renewal district because it was no impact on the taxing districts because the frozen base was already established. Once that exemption goes away, all that increment from the assessed valuation will go to the urban renewal district in the core area. So when that kind of development comes online, that's what you could use to do other things in the core area.
So the 3% is the limitation. If you haven't done anything to your property, your taxes can only increase by 3% a year. If you develop, there is a reassessment to take into account that increased value. So that's when taxes could go up by more than 3%. Is when we develop.
And so that 265 million that we can then spend 195 million of, is that you did some calculation on that based on that 3%, or you assumed that there was some amount of new development that was occurring?
That's a good question too. So in the core area report, Borough and the city council settled on an annual growth rate of 4%. So a little bit higher than 3% annual because that extra 1% annually over 30 years kind of equates to new development that's occurring. How they used that 4%, they took a look at a standard overall development within the city of Bend and applied that development rate to the core area.
Okay, and last
No,
question on this.
we got plenty of time.
So the 4% was kind of a broad assumption.
Mhm.
Where are we? Are we hitting that 4%? Are we not hitting it? And are we adjusting our maximum indebtedness?
Speak out of turn. So just to give you an idea, and you'll get this soon. So in 2023, your assessed value growth in the core area was 2.7%. In 2024, it was 0%. In 2025, this new year is 3.8%. So we're 2% below, or excuse me, 1.3% below the projection. I want to be very clear though, that's not irregular. Most urban renewal districts have about 3 or 4 down cycles over the 30 years. We're just actually very lucky to get it out of the way first because we wouldn't want to be in the position of having 4 or 5 bonds out there and then hit a 2008, which a lot of urban renewal districts in the state of Oregon struggled, and good faith and credit from their municipalities came in and had to kind of, they still paid it off, but it was a tough time. But for this, we're averaging just a little bit below our 5-year average, but this past year we had 3.8. So we're maybe we just had that 1 year downturn. So we'll know more next year.
So just really quick, so I think part of what has been an interesting wrinkle for CAB, right, is that we had a bigger increment coming in when this when this board first convened. And then we had that assessment, those assessment numbers come in. And so the increment's been pretty flat in terms of where can we reinvest that in the district. And so that's been, I think, a bit of an unforeseen challenge in some ways. And then we found other meaningful work to do as a group. But I think that that's been kind of like the arc of what we've seen since this board was first established.
So there has been ongoing discussions about adjusting that maximum indebtedness or just pausing the amount that we're trying to invest over the next year, 2 years?
It would be that latter. No, we're not going to change the maximum indebtedness because if we could see in 5 years or 10 years another massive growth that had been experienced in the last decade. And so we want to maintain that maximum indebtedness. But we do have to be fiscally prudent about can we meet the cash flow annually of any debt we take out. So that's the only requirement we have right now. So when we start we'll all go through this together in March, but once we start getting that bond issuance, we will show you that bond like amortization schedule and how it's being spent and what's the projection of the revenue. And you get a better idea. I know it's numbers, but it's part of your role is to help advise us on the budget. And that's another thing that we're doing this year too, is setting the budget for the next biennium. And Corey, and last CAB directed staff to kind of develop this development strategy to help spur more money in the core area. And that's what we've been working on for the last 5 months. And Borough will see it on February 19th, just to say, yeah, this is kind of a good idea, go get feedback. And then we'll come to this and really start having work sessions because we're still in the goal setting stage with city council, but also the budget as well.
And I think like the development realities that we've been seeing play out in the market are impactful here, right? And so the places that we've been focused have been on those public investments, right? That in theory are going to lift like all boats, right? And so that's where we've really had a lever to pull. And, the idea is that those investments over time are going to leverage that private investment that we need to see to get more of these projects coming online and the increment to go up. But I think, we have had, as we've heard in other housing conversations and development conversations sort of citywide, it's pretty acute here, I would say. And so I think for this group, when you look at the projects that we've been investing in, think those are the right projects, right? But so far, we haven't seen it sort of spur that sort of private side of the development that we know we're gonna need to see to achieve the vision of this place. So I think that's been another point of discussion for this group in the past.
Yeah, I just want to add, the interest rates went way up,
Yeah.
and so nothing got built. That's basically it. So, things that we had thought would be building by now
Right.
are not going forward. And so that's why we were looking at these other options to try to help spur the development. But I think over the long 30 years, we'll see plenty of development. It's just, we need to see changes on the lending side, I think.
I appreciate your optimism that it was good fortune that we had the slow start, but
Actually, that's really how you want it to play out, because you set the bar, and I don't want to say set the bar low because you can look better doing it later. It's if you, let's say you go out gangbusters, your first 5-6 years, you're seeing 8-9% growth rate. And then you have 5 years or 3 years, 0% growth rate.
yeah.
We are struggling to pay our bills. And so now that we're kind of getting a more conservative approach of our financial picture, we're going to be able to better estimate the next 10 years. And we're identifying the amount of money that this board will have in the core area over the next 5 years to kind of, I don't want to say play around with, but, and use that money to invest in opportunities to create more increment. Now, those projects, to your point, James, earlier, you're going to have to, as a board, advise Borough on that healthy balance of these, right? So do you want to invest your first 10 million in transportation, or do you kind of want to spread that out a little bit to help? Because transportation is the long-term investment, and this investment strategy breaks down short, medium, and long-term investments for you to consider. And so we have to have a healthy mix of building Second Street, Midtown crossings. That's going to help access for 30 years. But you also need money now to help special bonds and levies, additional increment to spur more development. But like I was saying earlier, your primary fiduciary responsibility is we got to make money for the taxing districts at the very end to create that good faith and goodwill. Because if we want to see a larger return at the end of the plan document. One of the things that Borough directed staff to do is if they got additional incentive greater than that 12 years, there has to be a 2-to-1 return on the community impact for our taxing districts in the comparable amount of time. So after the 12-year, if it's an extra $5 million, 5 years, by year 10, they had to be generating an extra $10 million for the taxing districts. So we want to make them whole as well.
That's a response to James' question, and I only know this because it's our category. You may not know, there's the tax increment finance plan, I think it is, which is the implementing document.
Mhm.
And those categories are like purposefully truncated because you couldn't get the whole thing on the screen, but like open space actually includes wayfinding. So it's like open space, amenities, facilities, wide wayfinding. I mean, that's what's in the document. And we just know that because we thought about it, we're like, oh, it's 20 million, but it includes like way broader than just like open space and parks and plazas. So like what you're bringing up has been contemplated, at least in the documents, unless that's changed,
Nope.
please correct me. So just know, like wayfinding has been something that's been mentioned in the planning documents in the past, and I don't know how, like, the requirements for implementation, and they all would know that much better, but it is something that I remember reading because it's something that aligns with the category we're most interested in.
So Jonathan, based on James' question about, adjusting our maximum indebtedness, so we're not compelled to spend our entire maximum, it's just a maximum, right?
Mhm.
So if we're below target, there's no reason we have to come back in and lower our sights on it.
No, it's about going over your MI.
That's what I thought.
Yeah. And so, for example, let's say, to your point, in year 2049, the maximum indebtedness is 195, and we're only going to get to 120, let's just say. But you have $20 million in the bank by that time, and you don't spend it. All that goes to them or to the taxing districts. Any unspent revenues will go to taxing districts at the rate at the time the plan ends. So whatever that is.
So we want to spend our money.
You don't have to, but
Best family.
Yeah,
Jonathan, there's no rules about the, I mean, I guess somewhat analogous to say the transportation bond measure where we have to do the debt issuance in increments and it's roughly comparable to like what we can actually get done in a certain period of time. We can't just sell the whole thing tomorrow. There's nothing, that guides, how many projects you can take on and how much debt you can issue as you go. It's really just it's really just about managing cash flow.
correct.
That's the only thing that Borough or CAB advises us on.
You could, let's say, for example, we didn't,
Limits.
correct. Let's say, for example, we didn't have Second Street or Franklin, you could have still issued $6 million debt next year and just held on to it and spent it wherever you wanted. But you'd have to, by resolution, award that debt to something eventually. But no, there's no legal.
Yeah, you would say in your resolution, we're gonna use this for projects identified in the plan.
Yep.
We said in our resolution, we're gonna use this for these specific projects.
But there's nothing on the revenue side that says, if you're starting to experience some of the, these ups and swings, it says, oh, I know you can do 195, but you're actually only in a position to do 80. There's no rule like that.
It's our fiscal policies that have that debt ratio, debt to income ratio that Jonathan was talking about. So we do place limits on ourselves, and then it is, part of what's considered. Our bond counsel considers that when and then the buyers of the bond want to know that we are gonna be able to pay them back. So
that's one
it's
indication.
you're gonna get, more interest in your bond if you've demonstrated you're being fiscally responsible and you can clearly pay them back. So there's limitations, maybe more on the market side than, but I'm not, the GO bond, I think you're thinking about, we have to spend be reasonably expected to spend within 3 years of issuing the debt. That may also apply, but I'm not certain. It sounds like not to these types of bonds.
And just a point here for meeting best practice. I know this is a work session, it's new, but just for sort of the online nature of this, if folks can come to a microphone and speak into a microphone, great.
Yeah, they're on.
Is that sufficient
Yeah.
for this now? Okay, great. Because in the past, we've had to have people come up to a microphone. So, okay, cool. Great.
Thank you.
John's on.
Oh, John, do you have a question? Or maybe he's just joining.
No, he raised his hand.
Yeah, okay.
There we go. Loud talk.
Hey, sorry, I didn't have access to audio, so I just raised my hand to be upgraded. Thank you.
Gotcha. Are there other questions folks have? Comments?
Oh, comments. Welcome to all the new people.
Mhm.
It's great to get new input and questions, and gosh, don't ever be afraid to ask questions. I'm always asking questions, as you may have noted.
I've got a question, just generally, I'm sure we'll get to it, but coming on new, this was a great recap of kind of big picture what CAP does. Where was the committee or board at kind of last year where things left off and where the big picture?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. We just did a council summit with a whole bunch of different committee members, various boards and committees that are advising council. And that was really informative of sort of sharing out like what is the purpose of the group and what are our major accomplishments. I think as Jonathan has shared, our major accomplishments that we tallied included the $100,000 to core area business assistance. And I think, I don't know if Jonathan mentioned this, but this is one of these kind of key things that we think is really important for addressing the gentrification and displacement that can often go along with urban renewal. And so this is seems like maybe a small dollar amount, but is actually a really important part of what we're up to here, which is like making sure that existing businesses who are there now can continue to invest in their business and continue to thrive. So that was really an accomplishment I think that we all were quite proud of. We talked a lot about the tiny TIF or the site-specific TIF, getting our knowledge and understanding up to speed and providing some input on how that policy could sort of take shape and be rolled out. Those are kind of like the two primary ones. We've had some ongoing work related to code and sort of removing barriers to reuse, right? Like we're we have an interest in making sure that when folks want to do redevelopment in this particular area, that they are able to do that in a pretty straightforward way. And so we've heard input, from a variety of folks who own properties or have projects, right? Like these are things in the code we'd like your eyes on. We'd like, some advice or recommendations on how we might streamline, make that easier, better. I actually don't have a super great sense of where that work landed. It may still be pending. I'm looking at Dale because I know he was on that subcommittee.
Yeah, it's been kind of excruciatingly slow. I was hoping it was something we could address pretty quickly with some, early changes and then, maybe some longer term ones to implement. But, with turnover in staff and end of the year, it's just, we're waiting, I believe, for a response back from community development with some of the ideas that were discussed. And I don't think we have a meeting scheduled.
It would be nice to get a report out on that, a status report. We had quite a few staff in here to listen to us and seem to understand our concerns, and it would be nice to know what changes are being implemented to respond.
Yeah, it seemed like there were some pretty simple things that we could do that would solve a lot of problems, and then some bigger structural things that we could take on basis.
Yeah, I think Second Street, there was a lot of healthy discussion, debate, opinions about what that project could or should be. And I think keeping that on track and landing in a place where that has ultimately been able to move forward with those investments was something that this group, I think, kind of came through that process. And even if it didn't necessarily land in a place that everyone would have liked it to, it would felt, I think, like an accomplishment again to kind of get something moving and happening in this space, because those public investments have really been the place where we've seen activity and action. So I think those are all kinds of things that this board sort of coming off of the past year, feeling good about, that we spent a lot of time on. I think what Jonathan shared, right? Like the next big move for this group is really looking at this investment strategy. And I think having a much more kind of clear, targeted plan and path for when we do see that increment starting to come in, where are we going first? Where is it going to maximize the investment and generate more TIF, right? So I think everyone's pretty excited for that work. I think we've got some good discussions to have around Franklin, right? This is the next Midtown crossing that's rolling. This is a, portion of the TIF is going towards that project. And so that's really starting to become real and get to a point where it is going to be built, this year. So there's always good discussion and debate about what that could and should look like on the design. So I think that'll be something for this group that lies ahead, that is going to be good and interesting, important, formative work for the district. Yeah, do other folks who've been around the block so far have other things to add there?
Well, it feels to me like this last year, we've been kind of underutilized. And part of that is just we haven't had the funds coming in to figure out what to do with them and prioritize projects. And I wasn't really leading with that question, but I like the idea of taking on more of the urban renewal stuff so that, we're here, it would be useful at while we're doing it.
Right. And something Jonathan and I talked about, and that this group also experienced, right? When we first formed, we were meeting monthly, right? We had a lot to do. We had a big increment to figure out what we're going to do with it. So that was kind of the nature of the early out years. And then because of what happened with the increment, right? Like the 0% assessed value, that was a big change. So we switched to a quarterly meeting, right? And I think to Dale's point, when you're meeting at that sort of rhythm to kind of get momentum and sustain, interest, knowledge, those kinds of things, a little more challenging. So I think looking to the year ahead, and we haven't confirmed, but there may be a more increased cadence to these meetings than quarterly. Certainly if some of these other proposed changes, move forward. So I think it's just something for kind of board members to be aware of, that we've had some flux in sort of how regularly we meet and what we're tasked with. And I think we're going to see that 2025 is going to look different than 24. So fair to say, I think. Yeah.
To the chair's point, we can use this opportunity to discuss kind of what you would like to focus on the next year, because this is a work session. The primary purpose of this work session is to learn about TIF, to learn about CAP, to learn about the core, and then to offer suggestions. We'd like to use that for, as Corey was saying, you will get the investment strategy the day it goes live for council's packet on council, because we will be meeting again in February to discuss the investment strategy and like what you think of it and so you'll see it about 3 weeks ahead of your actual meeting, so you'll have plenty of time to review it. But there may be things in there you might want to add to take away from. So to kind of give me a head start on some things that you might want to be focusing on in the next year, like what is maybe 1 to 3 things you'd like to see that this board do in the next biennium outside of maybe expanded responsibilities?
Can I keep digging into that 3% and 4%? So like a lot of residential properties in Bend are worth, let's say, $1 million, but their maximum assessed value is something like 300,000 value. And so those properties, their value is always going to go up at 3%, the maximum virtually, because of the history of the last 20 years. Is the core area like that? Or I guess what I think that I heard about the rates that from 2021, 2022, 2023 is that they didn't go up by 3 and 4%. And so that's telling me that the maximum assessed value is not that much different than what it.
So you're looking for a reason why that 3% didn't occur. I can give you that reason. You had about 4 applications that applied for enterprise zones in the core area, which is a total tax abatement for a period of 3 to 5 years. What ends up happening with abatements, this is where abatements are really tricky in the state of Oregon. When an abatement occurs, they abate it for that year's value, right? But then when the abatement is over, they will reassess it at that rate, at that change of property ratio and that real market value. So there could be a caveat. It could be worth a lot more, or it could be worth a lot less. And so we don't know what will happen, right? That's just kind of the nature of what an abatement is. In the core area, one of the 3 primary reasons why the increment didn't generate is because we do have competing priorities in the core area in addition to development. We're trying to acquire property for a city hall. When you buy that property and the city buys that property, it takes it off the tax roll. So it just removes it. So that's another decrease. You had several properties that got nonprofit tax exemptions because they provide public services in the core area. Bottle drop, you have your houseless services operations. And then you also had several businesses due to change in use and zoning code and maximum allowed development move to the core area, to the Juniper Ridge urban renewal area. So it's not a bad thing that we're seeing some of these changes. It's just they're kind of happening all at once, but most of the properties got assessed, and I can set up a meeting. We can walk through the numbers because I have every property listed and their value change in the core area. That's how I got these numbers. If you want to set up some time outside of this meeting, I'll be more than happy to go over what properties saw the most increases, what saw.
I guess the tension that I have with the core area is obviously if a building gets torn down and rebuilt into something much bigger, tax base goes up a lot. We know that. But that is gentrification. Whereas if we focus on many widespread, facade type improvements, that 3% for all these existing, we're trying to achieve that 3% for the existing buildings. And it's more of a holistic, raise everything existing without tearing it all down. Obviously, we need new buildings if we're going to reach 4%, above 3%. So I'm trying to, I don't have the answer, but I want to understand, are we trying to subsidize new buildings in a way through public infrastructure and whatnot? Or are we trying to do these kind of business assistance grants that improve Kalina Market, but they also improve the neighbor next to Kalina Market? And I guess before I formulate my opinions on what we think we should do, I'm just trying to understand, are the existing buildings already maxing out that 3%?
So wait till you see this investment strategy, because we have a proposed program called Land Development Capacity Assessment. So that's basically going to your point is, with the real market value and the assessed value, what is the differential? And why is the real market value so high and why is the assessed value so low? And we'll have that assessment maybe and you guys say, yeah, go forward. But we're trying to get to the heart of how can we increase existing property values without destroying the identity of the community? And two, when a property sells to an outside developer or to a new business or to a new homeowner, sometimes it's also reassessed at that real market rate, but the assessor handles that assessment based on a formula they've created. And I could have him present to this body in the future about like, how do you assess, why do you assess it this way, and ask those specific questions, because that gets into the more technical of, we don't want to compress because that's a whole nother issue with the tax rate, but then we want to maximize taxes without doing some of the damage that you were just identifying. So keep that thought for the next couple of months.
Just on that kind of note, so I mentioned earlier that, my employer owns the 181 Franklin site, which includes an old car dealership building on it. That building's gonna get demolished starting on Monday. And it was previously, it was leased out to the Central Oregon Intergovernmental Council, so, that tax rate that Jonathan was talking about, it was already affected by that. Short term, that's not gonna help our TIF. Long term, it's moving towards the ultimate goal, which is building a new project on that site. But it's gonna be after Franklin, it's probably gonna be after the city chooses and builds its city hall site. And that site will be used as a staging area for those projects, most likely.
Can I just ask, so you're tearing it down now, you can't use it for anything else or generate income for your company in those interim years?
That's a great question. And,
I mean,
yeah.
I could see if you're gonna start construction fairly soon after but you're talking like 3 years at least down the road, aren't you? And so why wouldn't you get income off that?
There will be some. I mean, it'll be leased out for the construction projects that are happening. in the
Oh,
local area.
like a yard that you
Yeah.
can do mobilization on. Gotcha.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. That's interesting. Okay.
So just to follow up on Dale's point, I call him Dan, I don't know, but Dale's point,
Happens all the time.
no, you will see on Franklin a lot of movement over the next year, but then you'll see no movement after first year. Because it's development cycles, right? And you were pointing that out. When you review some of the applications for a tiny TIF, you will see some of the high interest rates that these contractors are having to look at.
Yeah.
It's crazy. So.
I mean, I think so. We've got about 7 minutes before our meeting starts. So, and forgive me if you covered this I was late to the work session, apologize. But I do think just a little more kind of like the history and context setting is important about how we find ourselves in the here and now. And just a reminder for all of us of, the road to where we are now started long before the city had a urban renewal area designation and a TIF and a plan. And it was from the community. Right. And so like the community's vision for the Bend Central District and the core area, like that completely started as a grassroots community-led vision for this place becoming this really revitalized, vibrant, safe, connected place. And so I appreciate kind of what's shared here because the city, to their credit, really listened to the community and heard the community about this is what our vision is for where we want to be with this place in the future. And they created a plan for giving direction to that. And then they created a funding tool, which is TIF, to actually bring that vision to life. And so I appreciate the super technical questions and the information you're sharing here too. But I think it is nice to just sort of like remind ourselves like the big picture of the genesis of like where this all started and like what ultimately we are here to do, which is to help deliver the vision of the community, right? And so that Forgive me if you covered that at the beginning, but I just feel like it's an important part of sort of like the road to now that I just want us all to sort of be aware of and know about. So maybe you all do, but just felt like it was worth mentioning in this space. So
Can I just weigh in on, you had asked, are we interested? I personally am interested in working on the Murph, the other two districts, especially because as Dale pointed out, we're sort of underutilized, and I think that, there might come a point where it might be too much, or maybe you feel like you need to get somebody from both of these other districts on here, but I think in the interim, I would be interested. I mean, personally, I would be very.
yeah, so why don't we go ahead and start over here, and maybe you could just sort of speak to that if you have a general interest in that kind of broader urbanization role, if that's of interest or not, and if there's anything specific that you would really like in the year ahead for CAB to make sure that we're talking about or addressing. And if you just feel like it's too new and you don't know yet, that's also fine to say, but just will we have a few minutes here? Let's start over here and just kind of go around the horn.
Yeah, as someone brand new to the committee, I would definitely defer to everyone else for their opinion, but feels like it'd be a great way of seeing where this urban renewal program can get to in the future as it gets more developed, and kind of have that experience going through this.
I just wanted to add that one of the things that I'm concerned about, and James has sort of talked about it, is the fear of gentrification. And, I would love to see us be able, if we start getting dollars back in, is to look into doing our program again for, preservation of the existing businesses there. And it would be an interesting conversation to look at overall, how do we encourage maybe some of these big projects while still retaining the character? And I'm particularly, as also an artist, I'm very concerned about makers districts and keeping makers where they are, or creating opportunities to have more to enliven a district. What I'd hate to see is a place that doesn't have that pedestrian excitement, that it's all, buildings that are empty during the day. So maintaining that balance is important to me.
Thank you, Kathy. Bill?
Sure. Gentrification in the central district is kind of an interesting thought, because I mean, it's not lovely now, but there are some businesses there that are thriving. I went to a conference in San Diego a number of years ago, Urban Lands Institute, did a tour of these sort of like up and coming neighborhoods. And we went to, restaurant, and there were all these little thriving businesses going. And this guy, he wasn't a planner, he wasn't involved in any of this stuff, but he was a restaurant owner, manager. And, it's like this conversation was, well, how do these things get going? What makes this all of a sudden go? And he says, well, all these businesses you're seeing follow the artists. The artists follow cheap rent. And so it's this cycle of businesses come in and they try out the artists. So then it, moves around to, and so, it's kind of organic the way that happens, but it's gentrification.
Well, the interesting thing, I have two examples for you, Alex.
And wait, and just a reminder, we've got 3 minutes before the meeting kicks off.
Alexandria, Virginia, the torpedo factory is an old torpedo factory that the city eventually took over, and it's filled only with artists, and it's a huge draw into the center of town, but it's basically subsidized by the city to keep the artists there. The other is downtown Los Angeles, the arts district there. A similar deal where there's investment from the city to keep that a vital artistic place. So there are options, but it's something that just has to be in the forefront.
It has to be in our plan. And I think my other point was gonna be, it's like, it's private investment will follow the public investment. And, the city's made a decision here, borough and the city council, to invest a lot of resources into these urban renewal districts. And I think we have to look at it as, how can we best use the funds to generate more funds so that we can invest those funds and generate more funds. At the end of the time period, everybody wins here, except for the possible displaced businesses or residents. There's not really a whole lot of residents there, but that's what your plan can accommodate, is if you really are thoughtful about how to deal with that.
And it sounds like you're interested in that broader role.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I don't think we have enough.
Yeah.
I mean, we did all the planning in the first couple of years, and then it's like,
We're hungry for more. This group.
yeah, we've opened up the store. Where is it? Like,
And is it Dawn?
Is.
Okay, Dawn, how about you?
Well,
I'm definitely interested in more urban development. So my primary job is, and I love all this bank talk and interest rates. Since I'm the one that gets to sharpen my pencil every day and tell a contractor that maybe the project doesn't pencil cash flow, which is always a good time. So I definitely would like to be involved in more discussion on those types of things. How I got involved was just being involved with the Central Oregon Business District. And I serve on their board as well. And to me, what I would really love to see is an area where I can walk down the street with my granddaughter and there's businesses thriving, lower level mixed use apartments below above, art, restaurants, kind of like downtown where I'm at, and we're all connected with the bridge and everyone gets a piece, and it's very, I don't know, it's very bend. And I don't know another really way to describe it, except for y'all live here, so y'all know. And so I kind of would like to see the central district stay very much like that, with mixes, so.
James, how about you? Take us out.
I totally agree with the focus on arts. I hail from North Carolina, and Asheville has the same story that the arts made that place
No
really,
way.
really.
I went to Pittsburgh High School.
Oh, nice. But
And did you have a broader interest in that sort of larger urbanization role?
I would say
Maybe.
I would not oppose it, but my passion is for the core area.
Yeah.
And I would love to focus and strategize on how to make the core area cool. I mean, it's the center of the city. It's what's going to be the economic powerhouse for the city, hopefully, if we do it right. Whereas I don't feel like the other two taxing districts will be long-term economic powerhouses for the city in the same way. And so I'm not opposed to it. I'd love to serve how I can, but it's definitely not my passion.
Gotcha. Okay. I think we're at time. Just one note for you, Jonathan. I think something that's been helpful over time is just to hear like the status of projects, right? So we know that like we hear murmurs, right? That development cycle flows through. This project is on track, it's going, then it's paused, it's stalled out. So I think that there are a number of those, like at least, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 maybe. Hearing periodic updates about like where those might sit, if any of those have sort of taken advantage or interested in the kinds of development incentives that we're putting in place to actually help those things go, I think is just a helpful thing to know, right? Because these are things that have been in the queue, they've been kind of on the sidelines. We've been trying different levers and strategies to get them moving, right? And so we need to sort of hear and know, is this helping you move or not, right? And why? So I think that would be interesting for this group to hear about periodically through the year ahead. So, and John, sorry, we didn't quite get to, and I'm interested-ish in a bigger urbanization role, same sort of similar to what James described. The core area is much more kind of my focus and passion, but understand how all these pieces sort of play into a more livable and better Bend for all. So I have some interest there as well. And John, how about you really quick before we start the meeting?
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat where it's like the two tacking on is I don't think going to be too much extra workload. So my primary focus is also the core area and making that awesome, because when I hit 65 or 70, it'd be nice to retire there and walk to restaurants and stuff. So yeah, I'm down to expand it a little bit because I don't think it's going to be too much of an ask.
Thanks, John. Okay, so we're a few minutes over. We should probably bring the meeting to order. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. Bring this core advisory board meeting to order. We'll start with roll call. Have we done conflict of interest declarations? Okay, okay. So typically how this works for the new folks is we just go around, you can introduce yourself with your name, your affiliation if you'd like. And then Elizabeth might want to sort of speak to this piece. But essentially, if you have a potential conflict of interest, we declare it at this time. And so that would be something like owning a property that the district or something of that nature. So Elizabeth, feel free to, please to elaborate. Yeah, thank you.
So I don't think there's anything of substance on your agenda today, so you may not need to do conflicts of
Okay.
interest. You have to do them before you deliberate on something that may give rise to a conflict. So under Oregon law, you could have, as a member of a public body, which advises
borough, which is another public body, you have to disclose before you deliberate or decide or recommend on anything that may give rise to a financial conflict. And a financial conflict in the potential conflict world is something, a decision or recommendation you make that could have a financial benefit or detriment on a business with which you or your family member, or a business with which you or a family member are associated with, which basically means employed by, or any of your clients that you represent. Most of the time, what you'll be talking about are potential conflicts, because what you're doing are making recommendations, not final decisions. So anything you talk about could have that impact. And then the line into an actual conflict is if your decision would impact. So because you're only making recommendations, we're generally in the world of a potential conflict. And I think we have a memo that we generally give out to new board members. So if you haven't read that, you could dive into it more. If you have questions, you can ask me or any of the other city attorneys. But the way it works is you have to disclose the nature of the potential conflict, which is basically who your client or business is and kind of a general description of what is giving rise to the potential financial benefit or detriment. And then once you disclose, you can continue on with the conversation, participate in the deliberation and the recommendation. If it's an actual conflict, which again should not ever come up at this context, but if it does, you have to recuse yourself from the meeting and the discussion. So because there's nothing substantive on the agenda, you're not deliberating on anything, I don't think there's a need to do disclosures today.
Great. Thank you, Elizabeth. Any questions for Elizabeth on any of that?
Did you get them? Okay, I just want to make sure.
Okay, great. All right, we'll go ahead and start with roll call, and let's start over here and we'll go around.
All right, so brutalize your name, I apologize. Hank Kamakawa.
Here.
Catherine Austin.
Here.
Jeff Baker. Corey Harlan.
Here.
Dan Valkenberg.
Dave.
Man. I apologize. Don Kofer. Here. John Palin.
Here.
Don Fisher. James Teeter.
Here.
And do you want to do ex officio too?
Ex officio, Rachel Colton. Here. Sarah. I can't see your name. There we go. Sarah Aldendahl. She's
No, she
There
can't
she is.
speak. She's
Okay.
got her hand up. She can't speak. Meaning she's not allowed. She's not.
All right, well, it looks like we only have one item on our agenda for the rest of this meeting today, which is the election of the chair and vice chair. So our former vice chair, Lisa, stepped off. I'm currently serving as chair, obviously, and so I think that's our only item of business today is to have nominations for those two positions.
Could I ask if you would be interested in continuing as chair?
I am interested in continuing as chair. This would be my second run with it. So if others are interested in holding the gavel, so to speak, I would want to make space for them if other folks are interested in being chair. I enjoy it and I'm happy to do it moving forward. So either way.
I guess Dale, are you interested in becoming chair?
I think Corey does an excellent job. I would be willing to be vice chair.
That's
If
what-
people could please speak into the microphones.
Oh, is it not on? I apologize. Can you hear me, John?
Yeah, it's on. It's just people you got to face it, I think. So
Okay. Well, I was asking Corey if she would continue as chair and also if Dale was interested, and Dale said he might be interested in being vice chair. So that's all I was saying. So I would like to, I guess, nominate Corey to continue as chair. Is there,
A motion and a second. So a motion from Kathy, second from Dale. All those in favor? Okay. Sure, I'm in.
and John's hand is up too.
And that looks like unanimous.
And then I would like to nominate Dale to be vice chair.
Okay, motion from Kathy and second from Hank. And all those in favor?
Dawn's up too.
All right, and that looks unanimous as well. All right, well, that was pretty seamless. Thanks, everybody. And, obviously, welcome to our new members. We have new faces here, but I'm really excited to have new energy, new ideas, new questions, all of that informing the year ahead. So a warm welcome to all of our new members. Thank you so much for dedicating your time. We know that that's such a precious thing in so many people's lives. And so being willing to spend it here with us and towards the betterment of our city just means a whole lot. So a sincere thank you to all of you who are joining us, and really looking forward to a really fantastic year ahead for this group. So thanks so much. And any other business? Do we need to do public comment? I don't see anyone here. No, not on the agenda. Okay. All right. Well,
Your next meeting will be February 20th.
February 20th, same time, 3 to 5. Okay. Well, I think with that, we will do a rare thing here and we will adjourn early. Thanks so much, everybody.
Enjoy. No, I don't. Oh, that's Should we stop streaming? Oh, yeah. So they're gonna be. But I was at work, so. It's a real vibe. It is a real vibe. I mean,